The baby's first cry split the night air in a desperate wail that seemed to echo across the barren Arizona landscape. And Priscilla Edwards knew in that moment that she was utterly alone. The midwife pressed the tiny, blood-slicked infant into her arms while the other women in the room exchanged glances that ranged from pity to barely concealed judgment. It was October of 1882, and Wilcox, Arizona was not a forgiving place for a woman who bore a child without a husband to claim it. Priscilla clutched her son to her chest, feeling the rapid flutter of his heartbeat against her own. She was 22 years old, and the man who had promised her marriage had disappeared 3 months ago when she told him about the baby. Thomas Wright had been a smooth-talking gambler passing through town, and she had been foolish enough to believe his sweet words and sweeter promises. Now he was gone, likely to California or parts unknown, and she was left to face the consequences of their brief romance alone. The midwife, a stern woman named Mrs. Halloway, cleaned her hands in the basin and turned to face Priscilla with an expression that held more practicality than warmth. "You will need to decide what you are going to do, Miss Edwards. This town will not look kindly on your situation." Priscilla looked down at her son's scrunched face, his tiny fists waving in the air as he continued to cry. She had already decided. She would keep him, raise him, love him with every fiber of her being. The judgment of Wilcox could fall on her shoulders like desert rain, harsh and unforgiving, but she would not give up this child. "I am keeping him," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "His name is Daniel." The women filed out of her small, rented room above the general store, their skirts rustling with whispered conversations that Priscilla knew would spread through town like wildfire by morning. Only Mrs. Halloway remained long enough to show her how to nurse the baby, her weathered hands surprisingly gentle as she helped position Daniel at Priscilla's breast. "The first weeks are the hardest," the midwife said quietly, "but you seem like a girl with backbone. You will need it." When Mrs. Halloway left, Priscilla was truly alone with her son for the first time. The lamp flickered on the small table beside her narrow bed, casting long shadows across the sparse room. She had worked as a seamstress for the past 4 years, ever since her parents had died of fever when she was 18. She had saved every penny she could, dreaming of one day having enough to open her own dress shop. Those savings were nearly gone now, spent on rent and food during the final months of her pregnancy when her swelling belly had made it impossible to hide her condition, and Mrs. Garrett, her employer, had let her go with a look of cold disapproval. Daniel's crying softened to small whimpers as he nursed, and Priscilla felt tears slide down her own cheeks. She brushed them away impatiently. There was no time for self-pity. She needed to figure out how to survive, how to feed and clothe this precious child who depended entirely on her. The next morning brought harsh reality crashing down. Priscilla managed to dress herself and the baby, though every movement sent sharp pains through her body. She wrapped Daniel in the softest blanket she owned and made her way carefully down the stairs to the general store below. Mr. Peterson, the owner, was stacking canned goods on a shelf when she approached. "Mr. Peterson," she said, trying to keep her voice steady, "I know I am behind on the rent, but I promise I will find work soon and pay everything I owe." The store owner turned to face her, his expression uncomfortable. He was not a cruel man, but he was a businessman. "Miss Edwards, I have been patient, but you are now 2 months behind. I need that room for paying customers. I am sorry, but I must ask you to vacate by the end of the week." Priscilla felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "Please, Mr. Peterson, I have a newborn. Just give me 2 more weeks to find employment." He shook his head, already turning away. "I cannot. I have my own family to think of. The end of the week, Miss Edwards." She walked out of the store in a daze, Daniel sleeping peacefully in her arms, unaware that they would soon have nowhere to go. The October sun was already climbing high, promising another hot day. Wilcox sprawled before her, a rough town of wooden buildings and dusty streets, surrounded by the vast expanse of Arizona territory. Cattle ranches dotted the landscape for miles around, and the railroad had brought both prosperity and trouble in equal measure. Priscilla spent the morning going door to door, asking for any kind of work. She offered to take in laundry, to clean houses, to mend clothes. Most doors closed in her face the moment the residents saw the baby in her arms. Others opened just long enough for her to see the judgment in their eyes before they made excuses and sent her away. By noon, she was exhausted and desperate. She sat on a bench outside the telegraph office, trying to nurse Daniel discreetly under her shawl while people passed by, averting their eyes. The respectable women of Wilcox crossed to the other side of the street to avoid her, their parasols bobbing like disapproving flowers. She was so focused on the baby that she did not notice the man approaching until his shadow fell across her. Priscilla looked up sharply, instinctively pulling Daniel closer. The man standing before her was tall and lean, with broad shoulders that spoke of hard work and a life lived outdoors. He wore dusty riding clothes and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face, but she could see sun-weathered skin and dark eyes that held an expression she could not quite read. He appeared to be in his mid-20s, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. "Excuse me, madam," he said, removing his hat politely. "I do not mean to intrude. My name is James Ellington. I could not help but notice that you have been walking all morning and you look like you might need some assistance." Priscilla's first instinct was suspicion. She had learned the hard way what a man's interest could cost. "Thank you, but I am managing fine." James Ellington glanced down at her worn boots and the thin dress that hung loosely on her frame, evidence of the weight she had lost during her difficult pregnancy. His expression remained neutral but not unkind. "Forgive me for being forward, but you do not look fine. I have been in town for 2 days and I have heard talk. You are Miss Edwards, are you not?" Heat flooded Priscilla's cheeks, a mixture of shame and anger. "If you have heard the talk, then you know my situation. I do not need your judgment added to everyone else's." "I am not here to judge," he said quietly. "I am here because I think I might be able to help." She stared at him, confusion replacing her anger. "Why would you want to help me? You do not even know me." James looked uncomfortable for a moment, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. He put his hat back on, as if needing something to do with his hands. "I work as a foreman at the Double Bar Ranch about 10 miles north of here. I have been in town looking to hire household help for the main house. The owner's wife passed away last spring, and he has been managing on his own with a cook, but the place needs a woman's touch. When I heard about your circumstances, I thought perhaps you might be interested in the position." Priscilla's heart began to beat faster. What kind of position exactly? Housekeeping, laundry, general cleaning. The pay is $30 a month plus room and board. There is a small cottage on the property that you could use. It needs some fixing up, but it is solid and private. It sounded too good to be true, and Priscilla had learned to be wary of things that seemed too good to be true. "Why me? Surely there are other women in town looking for work who do not have my reputation." James met her eyes directly. "Because those other women have husbands or families to support them. You are alone with a baby, and I figure you need the work more than anyone else. The owner, Mr. Harrison, is a fair man. He would not hold your past against you as long as you do your job well." "And what about you?" Priscilla asked, unable to stop herself. "What do you expect from this arrangement?" Understanding dawned in his eyes, and he took a step back, giving her space. "Nothing except honest work, madam. I live in the foreman's cabin on the other side of the ranch. Our paths would not cross often." "This is simply a job offer, nothing more." Priscilla wanted to believe him, but doubt gnawed at her. Still, what choice did she have? She was about to be evicted, she had no prospects, and Daniel needed a roof over his head. "When would I need to start?" "I am heading back to the ranch this afternoon. If you are willing, you could come with me today. I have a wagon and can help you move your belongings." She thought of her sparse room, the few dresses hanging on pegs, the small trunk that held her parents' few possessions and her sewing supplies. "It would not take long to pack." "I need to think about it," James nodded. "I understand. I will be at the livery stable until 3 o'clock. If you decide to come, meet me there. If not, I wish you the best of luck, Miss Edwards." He replaced his hat, tipping it politely, and walked away down the dusty street. Priscilla watched him go, her mind racing. Every instinct told her to be cautious, but desperation was a powerful motivator. She looked down at Daniel, who had fallen asleep in her arms, his tiny face peaceful and trusting. She spent the next 2 hours making inquiries about James Ellington and the Double Bar Ranch. The livery owner confirmed that James had worked there for 3 years and was known as a hard worker and an honest man. The bartender at the saloon said the ranch owner, Samuel Harrison, was tough but fair, a widower who kept mostly to himself these days. Nobody had a bad word to say about either man, which was unusual enough in a town where gossip flowed as freely as whiskey. At 2:45, Priscilla made her decision. She climbed the stairs to her room and packed her belongings quickly, wrapping Daniel in a sling against her chest so her hands were free to work. Everything she owned fit into one trunk and a carpet bag. She paid Mrs. Halloway's daughter to help her carry the trunk down to the street. James Ellington was waiting at the livery stable as promised, leaning against a sturdy wagon hitched to 2 horses. When he saw her approaching with her belongings, relief crossed his face, followed quickly by something that looked like approval. "You came," he said simply. "I need the work," Priscilla replied, not wanting him to think she trusted him completely. "And my son needs a home." "Fair enough." James helped load her trunk into the wagon bed, handling it easily despite its weight. He offered his hand to help her up onto the wagon seat, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. His palm was calloused from years of ranch work, but his grip was steady and respectful. The ride out of Wilcox felt like leaving behind more than just a town. Priscilla watched the buildings grow smaller behind them, the faces of the people who had judged her fading into memory. Daniel woke briefly and fussed, and she rocked him gently until he settled again. James did not try to make conversation, seeming to understand that she needed time to adjust to this drastic change in her circumstances. The landscape rolled past, all brown earth and scrub brush, with mountains rising in the distance like ancient sentinels. The sky stretched overhead, impossibly blue and vast. After about an hour, James finally spoke. "The ranch is good land. Mr. Harrison runs about 500 head of cattle and has plans to expand. He employs 20 ranch hands, plus the cook and now you. Everyone earns their keep, and he treats his workers fairly." "What happened to his wife?" Priscilla asked, surprising herself with her boldness. James was quiet for a moment. "Childbirth. The baby did not survive either. It has been hard on him, but he keeps himself busy with the ranch work." Priscilla felt a pang of sympathy for the man she had not yet met. At least she had Daniel, healthy and whole. "I am sorry to hear that." "He is a good man," James said. "Gruff sometimes, but his heart is in the right place." They rode in silence for a while longer, and Priscilla found herself stealing glances at the man beside her. James had a strong profile, with a straight nose and a firm jawline darkened by stubble. His hands were steady on the reins, moving with the practiced ease of someone who had spent countless hours driving wagons and riding horses. There was something solid about him, something that spoke of reliability and quiet strength. She caught herself staring and looked away quickly, focusing instead on the landscape. She could not afford to be foolish again. Thomas had taught her what came of trusting a man's outward appearance. Whatever James Ellington's motivations were for helping her, she would keep her guard up and focus on providing for her son. The Double Bar Ranch appeared on the horizon as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains. The main house was a sprawling structure of wood and stone, clearly built with care and meant to last. Several outbuildings surrounded it: a large barn, a bunkhouse, corrals filled with horses, and smaller cabins scattered at respectful distances. Smoke rose from the chimney of what Priscilla assumed was the cookhouse. James drove the wagon past the main house and down a narrow path that led to a small cabin nestled among a grove of cottonwood trees. The structure was weathered but solid, with a covered porch and a stone chimney. "This would be your place," James said, pulling the horses to a stop. "Like I said, it needs some work. The roof is sound and the chimney draws well, but it has not been lived in for about a year. I can help you clean it out and make any repairs needed." Priscilla climbed down from the wagon carefully, cradling Daniel against her chest. She approached the cabin with trepidation and hope warring in her heart. James opened the door, and dust motes danced in the shaft of sunlight that streamed through. The interior was a single large room with a sleeping area separated by a half wall, a small kitchen area with a wood stove, a table with 2 chairs, and a rocking chair near the fireplace. The windows were dirty but intact, and the wooden floor, though covered in dust, appeared solid. "It is not much," James said from the doorway, "but it is yours, private and safe." Priscilla felt tears prick her eyes again, but this time they were tears of relief. "It is perfect," she whispered. Over the next hour, James helped her unload her belongings and then disappeared, returning with a broom, rags, a bucket, and a bar of soap. "I will draw some water from the well," he said. "You should probably rest while I sweep out the worst of the dust. You look exhausted." She wanted to protest, to insist that she could clean her own house, but exhaustion was indeed pulling at her limbs like lead weights. She had given birth less than 24 hours ago, and the day's activities had drained what little strength she had left. "Thank you," she said quietly, settling into the rocking chair with Daniel. James worked efficiently, sweeping out the accumulated dust and debris, wiping down surfaces and opening windows to let in fresh air. He moved with purpose, but not with the rushed impatience of someone eager to finish and leave. Instead, he seemed genuinely intent on making the space habitable for her. As he worked, Priscilla studied him more carefully. He was not a classically handsome man, but there was something appealing about his features, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners, suggesting he smiled more often than he frowned, the capable way his hands moved, the quiet consideration he showed in his actions. "Why are you really doing this?" she asked suddenly. James paused in his sweeping and leaned on the broom handle. "Doing what, all of this? Offering me a job, cleaning my cabin. You do not know me. Why do you care what happens to me and my son?" He was quiet for a long moment, and Priscilla wondered if she had offended him. But when he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful rather than defensive. "My mother raised me and my 2 sisters alone after my father was killed in a mining accident. I was 10 years old. I watched her struggle to keep food on the table and a roof over our heads while the people in our town looked down on her, because she took in laundry and cleaned houses to survive. They treated her like she was less than human just because she was poor and alone. It made me angry then, and it still makes me angry now. He went back to sweeping, his movements perhaps a bit more forceful than necessary. When I heard the women in town talking about you this morning, about how you deserved your fate and how you had brought shame on yourself, all I could think about was my mother. How nobody helped her except to give her the work nobody else wanted to do. How she worked herself to the bone and died when I was 17, worn out before her time. Priscilla felt her throat tighten. I am sorry about your mother. I am sorry about your situation, James replied, but I am also glad I can do something about it. My mother taught me that everyone deserves a chance to make an honest living and to be treated with dignity. That is all I am trying to offer you. What happened to your sisters? A smile touched his lips, the first real smile she had seen from him. They both married good men and have families of their own. I make sure to visit them whenever I can. Daniel began to fuss, and Priscilla stood to walk him around the room, swaying gently. James finished his cleaning and then built a fire in the wood stove. I will bring you some supplies from the cookhouse, he said. Coffee, bread, some stew if there is any left from supper. You need to keep your strength up. You have already done so much, Priscilla protested weakly, and I will do a bit more and then I will leave you to rest. He paused at the door. Tomorrow morning I will come by around 8 o'clock to introduce you to Mr. Harrison and show you the main house. Is that acceptable? Priscilla nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. True to his word, James returned shortly with a basket containing bread, butter, a jar of stew, coffee, and a pitcher of milk. He also brought blankets that smelled of cedar and fresh air, and a stack of split firewood that he arranged neatly beside the stove. If you need anything during the night, the foreman's cabin is the one with the green door, just past the barn, he said. Do not hesitate to come find me if there is a problem. Thank you, Mr. Ellington, Priscilla said. Truly, thank you for everything. James, he corrected gently. Out here we do not stand much on formality, and you are welcome, Miss Edwards. Priscilla, she offered, feeling that it was only fair. He smiled again, and she noticed that it transformed his face, making him look younger and less careworn. Priscilla, rest well. After he left, Priscilla heated the stew and ate hungrily, realizing she had not had a proper meal in days. She nursed Daniel and then made up a small nest of blankets in a dresser drawer for him to sleep in, something Mrs. Halloway had suggested. The baby settled quickly, exhausted from the day's travel. Priscilla lay in the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling as the last light faded from the sky. For the first time in months, she felt a small measure of hope. The road ahead would not be easy, but at least she had a roof over her head and a way to earn money to support her son. And she had met a man who had shown her kindness without expecting anything in return, which was more than she had experienced in a very long time. She fell asleep to the sound of crickets chirping outside her window and the gentle breathing of her son nearby. Morning came with rooster crows and the distant sounds of men heading out to work the range. Priscilla woke with a start, momentarily disoriented, before remembering where she was. Daniel was awake and hungry, so she nursed him while sitting in the rocking chair, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold through her window. She washed as best she could with the basin of water James had left for her, and dressed in her best dress, though it hung loosely on her frame. She brushed her long brown hair and pinned it up in a simple style, wanting to make a good impression on her new employer. James arrived precisely at 8 o'clock, knocking softly on her door. He had cleaned up since yesterday, his face freshly shaven and his clothes free of trail dust. "Good morning," he said. "Are you ready to meet Mr. Harrison?" Priscilla adjusted Daniel in her arms and nodded. As ready as I will ever be." They walked together to the main house, James matching his longer stride to her shorter one. The ranch was coming alive with activity, horses being led to corrals, men calling to each other, the smell of bacon and coffee drifting from the cookhouse. The interior of the main house was spacious but clearly neglected. Dust covered most surfaces, and the rooms had the sterile feel of a place that was lived in but not truly inhabited. James led her to a study where a man sat behind a large desk, reviewing papers. Samuel Harrison looked up when they entered, and Priscilla was struck by the weariness in his eyes. He was perhaps in his early 40s, with graying hair and a weathered face that spoke of years spent working in the sun. He stood politely when he saw her, his gaze moving to the baby in her arms. "Mr. Harrison, this is Priscilla Edwards," James said. "The woman I told you about, Miss Edwards." Harrison's voice was gruff but not unkind. "James tells me you are in need of work, and I am in need of someone to keep this house from falling into complete ruin. The arrangement would be $30 a month, room and board provided. You would be responsible for cleaning, laundry, and general household maintenance. I am not a demanding employer, but I do expect honest work. Does that suit you?" "Yes, sir," Priscilla said. "I am a hard worker, and I am grateful for the opportunity." Harrison's eyes softened slightly as he looked at Daniel. "The baby can stay with you while you work, so long as he does not interfere with your duties." "He will not, sir, I promise." "Good. James will show you what needs doing. You can start today if you are feeling up to it, or wait until tomorrow if you need more time to settle in." Priscilla thought of the $30 a month and her dwindling savings. "I can start today, sir." Harrison nodded approval. "Then I will leave you to it. If you need anything, speak to James or myself." James showed her through the house, pointing out the rooms that needed regular attention. The study, the sitting room, the dining room, 3 bedrooms upstairs, and the kitchen. The amount of work was substantial but not overwhelming. She could manage it, especially since she would have nothing but time while Daniel was still small. "I will help you when I can," James offered as they finished the tour. "Evenings and Sundays when I am not working the ranch." "You do not need to do that," Priscilla said. "You have already done so much." "I want to," he replied simply. "Besides, it will go faster with 2 people working." Over the next few weeks, Priscilla settled into a routine. She woke with the sunrise, nursed and changed Daniel, and then walked to the main house to begin her work. She cleaned methodically, room by room, washing windows and scrubbing floors, beating dust from curtains and polishing furniture. The house slowly began to transform under her care, regaining some of its former warmth. Daniel proved to be an easy baby, content to sleep in a basket while she worked or to lie on a blanket and wave his tiny fists at the world. She talked to him constantly as she worked, telling him stories and singing the songs her own mother had sung to her. James stopped by almost every evening, true to his word. Sometimes he brought small gifts, a bar of fine soap, a toy whittled from wood for Daniel, fresh milk from the ranch's cows. Other times, he simply helped her with tasks that were too difficult for her to manage alone, like moving heavy furniture or reaching high places. They developed an easy companionship during those evening hours. James had a dry sense of humor that surprised her, and he was surprisingly well-read for a ranch foreman. He had taught himself to read as a child and had accumulated a small collection of books over the years, which he offered to lend her. "I never had much schooling," she admitted one evening as they sat on her porch, watching the sun set. Daniel was asleep inside, and for the first time in a long time, Priscilla felt something approaching contentment. "My mother taught me to read and write, but we could not afford books." "You can borrow any of mine," James said. I have to warn you, though, my taste runs toward adventure novels and history, nothing very refined." "That sounds perfect," Priscilla said, smiling. As October gave way to November, Priscilla noticed subtle changes in herself and in her relationship with James. She no longer flinched when he came near, no longer viewed his kindness with automatic suspicion. She found herself looking forward to his evening visits, to the sound of his footsteps on her porch and his knock on her door. James, for his part, seemed to enjoy spending time with her and Daniel. He was surprisingly good with the baby, holding him with the careful competence of someone who had helped raise younger siblings. He made silly faces that caused Daniel to gurgle with what might have been laughter, and he rocked the baby to sleep with the same patient gentleness he showed with everything else. One evening in mid-November, after they had finished repairing a broken section of her fence, they sat on her porch steps sharing coffee. The air had turned cooler, though nothing like the bitter winters Priscilla had heard about in the Northern Territories. The Arizona night was crisp and clear, with stars scattered across the sky like spilled diamonds. "Can I ask you something?" James said suddenly. Priscilla felt her body tense automatically. "What is it? What was he like, Daniel's father?" She had known the question would come eventually, but it still stung. "He was charming," she said bitterly, "full of pretty words and promises. He told me he loved me, that he wanted to marry me. I believed him because I wanted to believe him. I was lonely after my parents died, and he made me feel less alone." James was quiet, letting her continue at her own pace. "When I told him about the baby, he left town the next day. I never saw him again. I do not even know if Thomas Wright was his real name." She laughed without humor. "I was such a fool." "You were not a fool," James said firmly. "You were a woman who wanted to be loved. That does not make you foolish, it makes you human. He was the fool for not seeing what he had." Priscilla turned to look at him, surprised by the intensity in his voice. In the lamplight spilling from her window, she could see his expression clearly, and what she saw there made her breath catch. It was not pity she saw in his eyes, but something else entirely. Something that looked almost like tenderness. "Thank you," she whispered. They sat in silence for a long moment, and Priscilla felt something shift between them, like a door opening to reveal a room she had not known existed. It both thrilled and terrified her. James cleared his throat and stood, breaking the moment. "I should let you get some rest." "Good night, Priscilla." "Good night, James." She watched him walk away into the darkness and pressed her hand against her chest, feeling her heart beat too fast. She could not be falling for him. It was too soon, too dangerous. She had made that mistake once before, and she could not afford to make it again. But as the days passed, Priscilla found it increasingly difficult to deny what she was feeling. James occupied her thoughts more than was prudent. She found herself listening for his footsteps, watching for him from her window, smiling at the smallest things he said or did. December arrived with cooler temperatures and occasional rain showers that turned the landscape briefly green. Priscilla had been at the ranch for 2 months, and Daniel was growing noticeably, his face filling out and his eyes beginning to focus on the world around him. He smiled now, real smiles that lit up his whole face, and the sound of his laughter was the sweetest thing Priscilla had ever heard. One Saturday afternoon, James arrived at her cabin looking nervous. He held his hat in his hands and shifted his weight from foot to foot. "Is something wrong?" Priscilla asked, concerned. "No, nothing is wrong. I just wanted to ask you something." He took a deep breath. "There is a dance in Wilcox next Saturday evening. A harvest celebration. I was wondering if you might like to go with me." Priscilla's first instinct was to refuse. She could imagine the stares, the whispers, the judgment. But then she looked at James, at the hope and nervousness in his expression, and something in her rebelled against letting fear rule her life. "I would like that," she heard herself say. "But I do not know if anyone in Wilcox would appreciate seeing me there." "Then they can leave if it bothers them," James said with unexpected fierceness. "You have as much right to attend as anyone else. Will you come?" "Yes," Priscilla said, feeling reckless and alive. "I will come." The week leading up to the dance passed in a flutter of nervous anticipation. Priscilla had little suitable to wear, but she took one of her better dresses and remade it, using her sewing skills to transform it into something more fashionable. She let out seams that pregnancy had strained and added new trim from fabric scraps she had saved. The result was not fancy, but it was respectable and fit her properly. Mrs. Chen, the ranch cook, agreed to watch Daniel for the evening. She was a Chinese woman who had come west with her husband to work on the railroad and stayed after he was killed in an accident. She was stern but kind, and she had taken a shine to the baby. "You go, have fun," Mrs. Chen said when Priscilla brought Daniel to her rooms behind the cookhouse. "Baby will be fine with me. You deserve to dance and smile." James called for her in a wagon at 6 o'clock, and Priscilla felt her breath catch when she saw him. He wore his Sunday best, dark trousers, a clean white shirt, a vest, and a jacket. He had slicked his hair back with water, and he held a small bouquet of wildflowers that he must have ridden far to find at this time of year. "You look beautiful," he said simply, handing her the flowers. "You look very handsome yourself," Priscilla replied, feeling her cheeks warm. The ride to Wilcox felt different from their first journey together. Then, she had been desperate and afraid. Now, she sat beside James feeling hopeful and alive, acutely aware of his presence beside her on the wagon seat. The dance was being held in the town's largest building, a meeting hall that served various purposes throughout the year. Music spilled out into the street as they arrived, and Priscilla could see couples whirling past the windows. James helped her down from the wagon and offered his arm. "Ready?" She took a deep breath and nodded. "Ready." They entered together, and the effect was immediate. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Dancers stumbled in their steps. All eyes turned to them, and Priscilla felt the weight of judgment settle on her shoulders like a heavy cloak. James must have felt her falter because he covered her hand with his own where it rested on his arm. "Hold your head high," he murmured. "You have nothing to be ashamed of." They made their way to the refreshment table, and slowly, conversations resumed. Some people stared openly, but others, to Priscilla's surprise, offered small nods of acknowledgement. Mrs. Halloway, the midwife, actually smiled at her. "Miss Edwards, Mr. Ellington," she said. "It is good to see you both." "Thank you, Mrs. Halloway," Priscilla replied, surprised and grateful. The band struck up a new tune, and James turned to her with an inquiring look. "May I have this dance?" Priscilla hesitated. She had not danced in years, not since before her parents died, but James was looking at her with such open hope that she could not refuse. "I am not very good," she warned. "Neither am I," he admitted with a grin. "We will fumble through it together." He led her onto the floor, and as his hand settled at her waist and he took her other hand in his, Priscilla felt something inside her chest unfurl like a flower opening to the sun. They moved together to the music, and while it was true that neither of them were accomplished dancers, there was a rightness to it that transcended technique. "Thank you for bringing me tonight," Priscilla said as they swayed together. "I know it was not easy, facing everyone's judgment." "I do not care about their judgment," James replied. "I only care about you." The simple honesty in his words made Priscilla's eyes burn with tears. "Why?" she asked. "Why do you care about me so much?" James was quiet for a moment, guiding her through a turn. When he spoke, his voice was low and intense. I have been trying to figure that out myself. At first, I told myself it was just about helping someone in need, about honoring my mother's memory. But that was not the whole truth. What is the truth? He met her eyes directly. The truth is that from the moment I saw you sitting on that bench, holding your baby and refusing to let the world break you, I was drawn to you. And the more I have gotten to know you over these past months, the deeper that feeling has grown. You are strong, Priscilla, stronger than you know. You are a good mother, a hard worker, and you have a kind heart despite everything you have been through. How could I not care about you? Priscilla felt tears spill down her cheeks. I am afraid, she whispered. Afraid of trusting again, afraid of making another mistake. I understand, James said gently. And I am not asking you to trust me completely right now. I am just asking you to give me a chance to prove myself worthy of that trust. Let me show you that not all men are like Daniel's father. The song ended, but they stood there for a moment longer, lost in each other's eyes. Then the spell was broken by someone clearing their throat nearby. Priscilla turned to see a well-dressed woman standing beside them. She was perhaps in her 50s, with kind eyes and an air of authority. Pardon the interruption, the woman said, but I wanted to introduce myself. I am Ellington Whitman. My husband and I own the ranch that borders the double bar. James tipped his head respectfully. Mrs. Whitman, this is Priscilla Edwards. Yes, I know who Miss Edwards is, Ellington said, and Priscilla braced herself for judgment. But the older woman surprised her. I wanted to tell you, my dear, that I admire your courage. It takes strength to hold your head high when society tries to make you bow. My own daughter found herself in a similar situation some years ago. She and her son live with us now, and they are the light of our lives. Do not let anyone make you feel ashamed for loving your child. Priscilla felt fresh tears well up. Thank you, Mrs. Whitman. That means more than you know. Ellington smiled warmly. If you ever need anything, or if you would like to visit and let our grandson play with your son when he is a bit older, please do not hesitate to call on us. After Ellington moved away, James looked at Priscilla with an expression of triumph. You see, not everyone is determined to judge you. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of music and dancing and conversation. To Priscilla's surprise, several other people approached her with kindness rather than condemnation. It seemed that James had quietly spread the word that she was under his protection, and people respected him enough to give her a chance. On the ride back to the ranch, Priscilla leaned her head against James's shoulder, exhausted but happy. Thank you for tonight, she said. I have not felt this happy in longer than I can remember. James slipped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her closer against the cool night air. You deserve to be happy, Priscilla. You and Daniel both. When they arrived back at the ranch, James walked her to her cabin door. They stood there in the darkness, neither wanting the evening to end. Can I see you tomorrow? James asked. After church. I do not think attending church would be wise, Priscilla said. I do not think I would be welcome. Then we will have our own service here, James said. I will read from the Bible if you like, and we can give thanks for our blessings. Would that be acceptable? Priscilla smiled. That would be perfect. James reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. Good night, Priscilla. Good night, James. She watched him walk away, and as she entered her cabin to collect Daniel from Mrs. Chen, Priscilla realized that somewhere along the way, without her quite noticing when it happened, she had fallen in love with James Ellington. The revelation terrified her, but it also filled her with a warmth that spread through her entire body. For the first time since Thomas had left her, she allowed herself to hope that perhaps, just perhaps, she might have a chance at real happiness. The winter months passed in a gentle progression of work and quiet contentment. Priscilla threw herself into her duties at the main house, and under her care, it gradually transformed from a house into a home. She added small touches that made it more welcoming. Fresh flowers when she could find them, curtains she sewed from fabric Mr. Harrison purchased for her in town, the smell of fresh bread and coffee that she made sure was ready when he came in from the range. Samuel Harrison was a man of few words, but she noticed that he seemed lighter somehow, less burdened. He complimented her cooking one evening, and another time she caught him standing in the sitting room, looking at the changes she had made with an expression of mingled sadness and appreciation. "It looks like it did when Mary was alive," he said quietly. "Thank you for that, Miss Edwards." "You are welcome, sir," Priscilla replied softly. But while her working relationship with Mr. Harrison was satisfying, it was her relationship with James that occupied most of her thoughts. They spent nearly every evening together now, sometimes working on projects around her cabin, sometimes simply sitting and talking while Daniel played on a blanket at their feet. James had become Daniel's whole world. The baby lit up when he heard James's voice, reaching out his arms to be held. James, in turn, was endlessly patient with the child, playing with him for hours and never seeming to tire of Daniel's demands for attention. One evening in late January, as they sat together watching Daniel attempt to grab his own toes, James said quietly, "I need to tell you something." Priscilla felt her heart skip. "What is it?" "I have been thinking a lot lately about the future, about what I want from life." He turned to look at her, his expression serious. "Before I met you, I was content with my work. I had a good job, a place to live, enough money to get by. That was all I thought I needed." "And now?" Priscilla asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Now I know that I was wrong. Now I know that what I really want is a family. I want a home filled with laughter and love. I want to come home every evening to people who are happy to see me. I want to watch children grow and teach them about the world." He paused, then added softly, "I want all of that with you and Daniel." Priscilla felt tears gather in her eyes. "James, Wait, let me finish," he said, reaching for her hand. "I know you are afraid, I know you have been hurt. But I need you to understand that I am nothing like him. I will never make you promises I do not intend to keep. I will never abandon you or Daniel. I am not asking you to give me an answer right now. I am just asking you to think about it. To consider the possibility of letting me into your life completely." "You are already in my life," Priscilla said, her voice shaking. "You have been for months now, I know. But I want more than this. I want to marry you, Priscilla. I want to give Daniel my name and raise him as my son. I want to build a life with you." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with significance. Priscilla looked down at their joined hands, at the way his fingers wrapped around hers so protectively. She thought about the past months, about how James had proven himself time and again to be exactly what he claimed. A good, honest, decent man. But she also thought about Thomas, about the pain of betrayal, about the fear of making another mistake. Could she really trust her judgment again? Could she really believe that this happiness was real and lasting? "I need time," she said finally. "I want to say yes, James. More than anything, I want to say yes, but I am terrified of being wrong again." "I understand," James said, squeezing her hand. "Take all the time you need. I am not going anywhere." Over the next few weeks, Priscilla wrestled with her decision. She made lists of reasons to say yes and reasons to say no. She prayed for guidance. She watched James interact with Daniel, noting the genuine love and affection he showed the child. She observed how he treated others on the ranch, how he handled problems with fairness and integrity. She also talked to Mrs. Chen, who had become something of a confidante. The older woman listened to Priscilla's concerns and then said bluntly, "That man loves you. He loves your son. He is good man, hard worker, "What more you want? I want to be sure," Priscilla replied. "Nobody ever sure about anything," Mrs. Chen said. "But some risks worth taking. That man, he worth the risk." The catalyst for her decision came on a cold February morning. Priscilla was at the main house, cleaning Mr. Harrison's study, when she overheard a conversation through the open window. James was talking to another ranch hand in the yard outside. "I hear you are sweet on the Edwards woman," the ranch hand said. His tone was not unkind, but there was a note of curiosity. "That true?" "Yes, it is," James replied without hesitation. "You know about her situation, right? About the baby." "Of course I know," James said, and there was steel in his voice now. "And it does not matter to me. Daniel is a good baby, and Priscilla is a good woman. She made a mistake trusting the wrong man, but that does not define her. You would really raise another man's child as your own, in a heartbeat," James said firmly. "That boy needs a father, and his mother needs a husband who will treat her with the respect and love she deserves. I aim to be both those things if she will have me." Priscilla stood frozen at the window, tears streaming down her face. She had needed to hear that, needed to hear James defend her and Daniel without hesitation, needed to know that he meant every word he had said to her. She made her decision in that moment. That evening, when James came to her cabin, Priscilla met him at the door with Daniel in her arms. James must have seen something in her expression because he stopped on the porch step, his eyes searching her face. "Come in," Priscilla said. "I need to talk to you." He entered, removing his hat, and stood in the center of her small living area looking both hopeful and nervous. Priscilla set Daniel in his basket and then turned to face James. "I heard you talking to Jack today," she said. "I did not mean to eavesdrop, but I was cleaning Mr. Harrison's study and the window was open." James's expression became wary. "What did you hear?" "I heard you defend me and Daniel. I heard you say that you would be his father in a heartbeat if I would let you." She took a step closer to him. "Did you mean it?" "Every word," James said without hesitation. "Priscilla, that boy is as much mine in my heart as if I had been there the day he was born. I love him, and I love you." It was the first time he had said the words so plainly, and they hit Priscilla with the force of a physical blow. "You love me." "I love you," James repeated, taking her hands in his. "I have loved you since the day I saw you refuse to let the world break you. I have loved you more with each passing day. I love your strength, your determination, your kindness. I love the way you sing to Daniel when you think nobody can hear. I love the way you laugh at my terrible jokes. I love everything about you." Priscilla felt more tears slide down her face, but these were tears of joy rather than fear. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I have for a long time, but I was too afraid to admit it, too afraid to trust myself." "And now," James asked, hope blazing in his eyes, "now I know that you are nothing like him. Now I know that what you are offering me is real. Yes, James, yes, I will marry you. Yes, you can be Daniel's father, yes to all of it." James let out a whoop of joy and swept her into his arms, spinning her around until she was laughing and crying at the same time. When he set her down, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, softly at first and then with growing passion. It was nothing like the kisses Thomas had given her, kisses that had been all about taking what he wanted. This kiss was about giving, about sharing, about promising a future together. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, James rested his forehead against hers. "I will make you happy," he promised. "I will spend every day of my life making sure you and Daniel are loved and cared for." "I know you will," Priscilla said, "because that is who you are." They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the ranch. Eleanor Whitman helped Priscilla make a beautiful dress from soft blue fabric, and Mrs. Chen baked a cake. Samuel Harrison stood as James's witness, and a leaner stood as Priscilla's. Daniel, now 5 months old and growing chubby and happy, was present in Priscilla's arms, gurgling contentedly through the entire ceremony. The minister who performed the ceremony was a traveling preacher who came through Wilcox once a month. He was an elderly man with kind eyes who asked no judgmental questions, simply joining their hands and blessing their union. "Do you, James Ellington, take Priscilla Edwards to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do," James said, his voice strong and sure. "And do you, Priscilla Edwards, take James Ellington to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do," Priscilla said, meaning it with every fiber of her being. "Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." James kissed her gently, mindful of the baby between them, and when they pulled apart, Priscilla saw tears shining in his eyes. "Mrs. Ellington," he said softly. "Mr. Ellington," she replied with a smile. They celebrated with a simple meal in the cookhouse, which Mrs. Chen had decorated with wildflowers and ribbons. The ranch hands who had gathered to witness the ceremony toasted the new couple with whiskey and offered their congratulations. Even taciturn Samuel Harrison smiled and wished them well. "You have made my house a home again, Mrs. Ellington," he said to Priscilla. "And James is a good man. You both deserve happiness." That night, James carried Priscilla over the threshold of her cabin, which was now their cabin. They had spent the previous week making small improvements, adding a larger bed and building a proper cradle for Daniel. They put the baby down to sleep, and then stood together in the center of the room, suddenly shy with each other despite the months of companionship they had shared. "I have never done this before," James admitted. "Been married, I mean. I want to do right by you." Priscilla reached up and touched his face. "We will figure it out together." They came together slowly, tentatively at first and then with growing confidence. James was gentle and patient, nothing like the hurried, selfish coupling she had experienced with Thomas. This was about connection, about love, about two people choosing to make themselves vulnerable to each other. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, listening to Daniel's soft breathing from his cradle nearby. James traced patterns on Priscilla's bare shoulder, his touch reverent. "Are you happy?" he asked. "Happier than I have ever been," Priscilla replied truthfully. "I never thought I could feel this way again. You have given me back my hope, James." "You gave me something to hope for," he replied. "Before you, I was just existing. Now I am living." The weeks that followed were an adjustment as they learned to navigate married life. James moved his few belongings into the cabin, and they established new rhythms and routines. He woke early to go to work on the ranch, but he always made time to kiss Priscilla goodbye and to ruffle Daniel's hair. He came home every evening for supper, and afterward, they would sit together on the porch or by the fire, talking about their days or simply enjoying each other's presence. Daniel thrived under James's attention. The baby had started calling James Da by the time he was 8 months old, and the look of pure joy on James's face, the first time he heard it, made Priscilla cry happy tears. James was the only father Daniel would ever know, and he embraced the role with wholehearted dedication. In April, Priscilla discovered she was pregnant again. She had suspected for a few weeks before she told James, wanting to be certain. When she finally revealed her news one evening as they prepared for bed, James's reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He picked her up and spun her around despite her laughing protests, then carefully set her down and knelt before her, pressing his ear to her still flat stomach. "Hello in there," he said solemnly. "This is your father. I cannot wait to meet you." Priscilla ran her fingers through his hair, overwhelmed with love. "You are going to be a wonderful father. You already are." James stood and pulled her into his arms. "We are going to have a baby," he said wonderingly. "A child that is part you and part me." "Are you happy?" Priscilla asked. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," James replied. "I love Daniel with all my heart, and this new baby will be just as loved. Our family is growing, Priscilla. We are building something real and lasting." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Priscilla continued her work at the main house for the first several months, though Samuel Harrison insisted she reduce her hours and avoid any heavy work. James was endlessly solicitous, fussing over her and making sure she did not overdo things. Daniel was walking now, toddling around on chubby legs and getting into everything. He was a happy child, quick to laugh and slow to cry, and he adored his father. James taught him simple words and played with him for hours, building towers of blocks for Daniel to knock down and chasing him around the cabin, until they were both breathless with laughter. In late November, as the weather turned cooler and the leaves on the cottonwood trees turned golden, Priscilla gave birth to a son. The labor was easier than her first had been, perhaps because she was not facing it alone and terrified. James stayed with her through the entire ordeal, holding her hand and wiping her forehead with a cool cloth. Mrs. Chen and Mrs. Whitman attended as midwives, and when the baby finally emerged, crying lustily, James was the first to hold him. "He is perfect," James said, tears streaming down his face. "Priscilla, he is absolutely perfect." They named him Joshua, and he was indeed perfect, a healthy baby with dark hair like his father's and his mother's gray eyes. Daniel was fascinated by his new brother, wanting to touch him constantly and bring him toys. "Gentle," James reminded him over and over, showing Daniel how to stroke the baby's soft cheek. "You have to be very gentle with baby Joshua." Watching James with both boys, seeing the love and pride on his face, Priscilla felt her heart might burst with happiness. This was her family. These were her people. This was the life she had never dared to dream she could have. Time passed in the way it does when life is full and satisfying. The boys grew, each reaching their milestones in turn. Daniel started talking in full sentences and asking endless questions about everything. Joshua learned to smile and then to laugh, his giggles filling the cabin with joy. James had been promoted to ranch manager, a position that came with more responsibility but also better pay and a larger house on the property. They moved into it when Joshua was 6 months old, marveling at the space and the luxury of separate bedrooms for the children. Priscilla had stopped working at the main house after Joshua's birth, but she kept busy with her sewing, taking in special orders from the ladies in Wilcox and the surrounding ranches. Her skill had become known throughout the region, and she had more work than she could handle. The money she earned was saved carefully, with dreams of one day opening that dress shop she had once imagined. Samuel Harrison had become almost a part of their family. He dined with them once a week, and was always willing to watch the boys when James and Priscilla needed time alone. He seemed to find peace in the presence of the children, and more than once Priscilla caught him watching them play with an expression of bittersweet longing. One evening, after a particularly lively dinner where both boys had been at their most charming and exhausting, Samuel pulled James aside. Priscilla, cleaning up in the kitchen, could hear their conversation through the open door. "I have been thinking about the future," Samuel said. "About what happens to the ranch when I am gone. I have no heirs, no children to leave it to." "You have many good years ahead of you yet," James replied. "Perhaps, but it is still something that needs considering." Samuel paused. I want you to have the ranch, James, you and your family. You have worked this land for years and you have made it prosper. More than that, you have given me back something I thought I had lost forever, the sense of being part of a family." James seemed stunned. "Mr. Harrison, I do not know what to say. Say you will accept. Say you will take care of this place after I am gone and raise your boys to love it as I have loved it. That is all I ask." "We would be honored," James said, his voice thick with emotion. When Samuel left that evening, James told Priscilla about the conversation. They stood together in their bedroom, watching through the window as their boys slept peacefully in the next room. "Can you believe it?" James said. "The ranch will be ours one day. Our sons will inherit it. We will have a legacy to leave them." "It is more than I ever dreamed possible," Priscilla said. "When I think about where I was a few years ago, alone and afraid and thinking my life was over, and I compare it to where I am now, it seems impossible that both could be real." James pulled her close. "Your life was not over. It was just beginning. You just needed someone to see your worth and give you a chance to prove yourself." "You did more than that," Priscilla said. "You loved me when I did not think I deserved to be loved. You took my son and made him yours without hesitation. You gave me a family and a home and a future. You gave me everything." "You gave me the same," James replied. "I was just existing before you came into my life. Now I have purpose and meaning. I have love and laughter and 2 beautiful sons. I have you." They kissed, a slow, sweet kiss that spoke of love and commitment, and all the years they had already shared, and all the years yet to come. The years continued to unfold in a tapestry of ordinary moments that somehow added up to an extraordinary life. Daniel started school in Wilcox, riding into town each morning with his father and being picked up each afternoon. He was a bright child, curious and eager to learn, and his teachers praised his quick mind. Joshua grew into a rambunctious toddler who followed his big brother everywhere and tried to do everything Daniel did. The 2 boys were inseparable, and watching them play together filled Priscilla with contentment. When Daniel was 7 and Joshua was 4, Priscilla discovered she was pregnant for a 3rd time. This pregnancy was more difficult than the previous 2, with more sickness and exhaustion. James hired help for her, a young woman from town who came each day to assist with the housework, and the children so Priscilla could rest. In the spring of 1889, Priscilla gave birth to a daughter. They named her Grace, and she was a beautiful baby with her father's dark eyes and her mother's delicate features. James was utterly enchanted with his daughter, walking her around the house for hours when she cried and singing to her in his off-key voice. Daniel and Joshua were equally besotted with their baby sister, fighting over who got to hold her and bringing her flowers and interesting rocks to examine. The house was filled with noise and love, and the beautiful chaos of a large family. On a warm evening in June, when Grace was 2 months old, the whole family sat on the porch watching the sun set. Daniel was reading aloud from one of his school books, showing off his improving skills. Joshua was building something elaborate with wooden blocks that James had made for him. Grace was asleep in Priscilla's arms, her tiny fist curled against her mother's chest. James sat beside Priscilla, his arm around her shoulders, watching their children with obvious pride and satisfaction. "You remember that first day?" Priscilla asked quietly. "When you found me in Wilcox?" "Every detail," James replied. "You were sitting on that bench looking lost and determined all at once. Daniel was crying and you were trying so hard to be strong." "I was terrified," Priscilla admitted. "I had no idea what I was going to do or how I was going to survive." "But you would have found a way," James said with certainty. "You are the strongest person I know, Priscilla. You would have survived and thrived eventually." "Maybe," Priscilla allowed, But I am glad I did not have to do it alone. I am glad you saw me that day. I am glad you offered me a chance." "I am glad you took it," James said. "I am glad you trusted me enough to come to the ranch with me. I am glad you let me into your life and Daniel's life. I am glad for every single moment that has brought us to this place." Priscilla leaned her head against his shoulder, careful not to disturb the sleeping baby. "I love you, James Ellington. I love the life we have built together. I love our family and our home and our future. I love all of it." "I love you too," James said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "More than I can ever adequately express. You and these children are my whole world." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn from blue to pink to purple as the sun disappeared below the horizon. Stars began to appear, first one and then dozens and then hundreds, until the whole sky was ablaze with light. Daniel closed his book and came to lean against his father's knee. Joshua abandoned his blocks and climbed into Priscilla's lap beside Grace. They sat together as a family, complete and content, while the Arizona night settled around them like a blessing. In the years that followed, the Ellington family continued to grow and flourish. Daniel eventually went to college in California, studying engineering, but he returned to help manage the ranch. Joshua discovered a talent for working with horses and became one of the most sought-after horse trainers in the territory. Grace grew into a spirited young woman who inherited her mother's skill with needle and thread, and her father's head for business, eventually opening the dress shop that Priscilla had once dreamed of. Samuel Harrison lived to see all three children grow into capable adults, and he died peacefully in his sleep in 1902. Content in the knowledge that his beloved ranch would continue to thrive under the care of the family he had come to love as his own. James and Priscilla grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year. They became grandparents and then great-grandparents, watching their family tree branch out and spread roots deep into the Arizona soil. On their 40th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren threw them a celebration at the ranch. The house and grounds were filled with people, all of them connected by blood or marriage to the woman who had once sat alone on a bench in Wilcox, convinced her life was over, and the man who had seen her worth when no one else would. James stood to make a toast, his hair now silver and his face weathered by years of sun and wind, but his eyes still bright when they looked at his wife. 40 years ago, he said, I met a woman who changed my life. She was alone and afraid, holding a baby and facing a future that must have seemed impossibly dark. But she had something inside her that I recognized immediately, an unbreakable spirit and a capacity for love that was humbling to witness. He looked at Priscilla, who sat beside him with tears in her eyes. I asked if I could help raise her son with her, and she said yes. That one word changed everything. That one word gave me a family and a purpose, and a love that has sustained me through every trial and triumph of the past 4 decades. He raised his glass. To my wife, Priscilla, to our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, to the life we have built together, brick by brick, day by day, with love as our foundation. May we have many more years together, and may the legacy we leave behind be one of love, acceptance, and family. To love and family, everyone echoed, raising their own glasses. Later that evening, after the guests had departed and the house was quiet, James and Priscilla sat together on the porch swing they had installed years ago. The same stars that had witnessed their first conversation, their first kiss, the births of their children, shone overhead. No regrets. James asked, taking her hand in his. Priscilla thought about the question seriously. She thought about Thomas and the pain he had caused. She thought about the fear and desperation she had felt that day in Wilcox. She thought about all the hardships and challenges they had faced over the years. But then she thought about Daniel's graduation from college, about Joshua's first championship horse, about Grace's wedding day. She thought about lazy Sunday mornings with her family gathered around the breakfast table. She thought about 40 years of falling asleep beside a man who loved her unconditionally and waking up beside him every morning. She thought about the profound satisfaction of a life well lived and a family well loved. Not a single one, she said firmly. Every moment, good and bad, brought us to this place. How could I regret any of it? James smiled and pulled her closer. That is exactly the right answer. They rocked gently in the swing, watching the stars and listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch settling for the night. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted. A horse nickered softly in the barn. The wind rustled through the cottonwood trees that had shaded their first home together. "You remember what you told me that first day?" Priscilla asked. "When you offered me the job?" "I said a lot of things that day," James replied. "Which part?" "You said your mother taught you that everyone deserves a chance to make an honest living and to be treated with dignity. That is all you were trying to offer me." "I remember," James said. "It was true then, and it is true now." "But it was not all you offered me," Priscilla said. "Whether you knew it at the time or not, you offered me so much more. You offered me hope when I had none. You offered me respect when the world gave me only judgment. You offered me love when I thought I did not deserve it. You offered me a future when I could not see past the next day." She turned to look at him, studying the beloved face she knew as well as her own. "You did not just help me raise Daniel. You became his father in every way that matters. You did not just give me a job. You gave me a home and a family and a life beyond my wildest dreams. You saved us, James. You saved us both." James's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "You give me too much credit. You saved yourself, Priscilla. You had the courage to accept help when it was offered, but you did all the hard work. You were the one who refused to give up. You were the one who kept fighting for a better life for your son. I just had the privilege of being there to witness your strength and to share in the life you built." "We built it together," Priscilla insisted. "Every brick, every beam, every moment of joy, and every challenge overcome. We did it together, as partners and equals, and as two people who loved each other enough to work for something better." They kissed, a soft kiss that tasted of years and memories and enduring love. When they pulled apart, they rested their foreheads together, breathing the same air, sharing the same space as they had for 40 years. "I would do it all again," James whispered. "Every single moment, every decision, every challenge. I would choose you every time, Priscilla. In every lifetime, in every circumstance, I would choose you." "And I would choose you," Priscilla replied. 1,000 times over, I would choose you." They sat together as the night deepened around them. Two people who had found each other when they needed it most, and who had built a life that exceeded anything either of them had dared to imagine. The ranch stretched out before them in the darkness, generations of their family sleeping peacefully under its protection. The legacy they had created together, born from a moment of compassion on a dusty street in Wilcox, would endure long after they were gone. But that was for the future to worry about. For now, there was only this moment. The warmth of James's arm around her shoulders, the gentle creak of the porch swing, the vast Arizona sky overhead, and the profound contentment of a love that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger for it. Priscilla closed her eyes and smiled, secure in the knowledge that she was exactly where she was meant to be, with exactly who she was meant to be with. Her baby had been born without a father, but a cowboy had asked if he could help raise him with her. And in saying yes, she had found not just a father for her son, but a husband for herself, a family beyond measure, and a love that would last all the days of her life. And that, she thought as sleep began to pull her under, was the greatest blessing of all.